The torque and snake are found extremely often. There are two ways they can appear. First, the torque can be held in the center, as étant sur heureux, or replaced by a purse, as at Bandouve and Sommervico. In these cases, there are two snakes, one on either side, with the exception of Rheims, which lacks the snakes, but presents its own system, as we will see. Second, one could be held in one hand and one in the other, with the torque again being possibly replaced by a purse, as in this image from the British Museum. In the exception of the Remy Potin coin, the lack of the snake can be explained by a lack of space, having been moved to the coin's reverse. Two things can be noticed here. First, whenever there is one, there is almost always the other. The two are paired. Second, when they are held in different hands, the snake is always in the left and the torque in the right, although an image of Mercury from the Compiègne forest has them reversed. This is significant because of the distinction in Indo-European thought between right and left. Right is positive, light, above, order, and culture, while left is negative, dark, below, chaos, and nature. The torque and snake are arranged according to this plan. In Cernunnos' right hand is a culturally created torque, symbol of social status, and his left is a snake, which comes from the chaotic natural world below. We see a similar but different organization with the two animals on the cauldron. On Cernunnos' left is a dog. This is an animal of culture, so in that sense we might be surprised to see it there. However, it is also a predator and a carnivore, and therefore a dealer of death. On the other side is a stag, animal of nature, but also a food supply and an herbivore, and therefore an animal of life. We therefore see two sets of symbols, torque and snake, stag and dog, each of which represents an opposition in the horizontal direction. The system is much richer, however. The elements also complement each other vertically. On Cernunnos' right, we have on top an animal of nature, and on the bottom an article of culture. On his left, there is an animal of culture above one of nature. In the middle of this is Cernunnos, who in himself contains both nature in his antlers and culture in his human form. Putting this in the form of a chart, we see this. The Gundestrup cauldron is not just a mix of symbols then, but a map in which they have been located to convey maximal meaning. But is this a fluke? Have I just been reading my own ideas into this image? The theory needs to be tested. I've already mentioned something that can be seen as a test, that when torque and snake are in separate hands, it is always torque right and snake left, which is just as the theory would predict, and even in those cases where a different system is used, that system is a balanced one, not an opposite version, where we would have found the torque in the left hand and the snake in the right. Another stronger test is to look at other images where we have attributes beyond the minimum necessary to identify Cernunnos, but which are different from those in the cauldron. Let's start with Rheims. Here there is neither torque nor serpent, although the arm ring might be a stand-in for the torque. If so, notice that it is on the right arm. What we have instead are two Roman gods and two animals. What are the characteristics of these, and in what way do they support or detract from my theory? Apollo and Mercury are a natural pairing in Greco-Roman mythology. Since the Roman mythology about Mercury comes from the Greek Hermes, and Apollo was taken over wholesale from the Greeks, we need to see how they were related in Greece. Their relationship is established in the Homeric hymn to Hermes. Hermes, while still an infant, steals Apollo's cattle and then lies about it. The two are eventually reconciled by Zeus and become friends. Because of this episode, Hermes became god of liars. Apollo, on the other hand, is god of truth. He is also god of light into the world above, whereas Hermes is the god who conducts souls to the dark world below. The two therefore represent paired opposites. The two animals are also connected, not just by being animals, but by their being male and two largest providers of meat. They differ, however, in the deer being wild and the bull being tame. They therefore both provide a kind of prosperity, but in opposing ways. In both gods and animals we therefore find opposing pairs. There is also an opposition within the vertical pairs. Apollo is the preeminent deity of culture, and we find him paired with the archetypal animal of wilderness. Mercury, on the other hand, the liar, thief, and conductor to death, stands in opposition to the culture of which the bull is the symbol. The relationship is shown here. Between pairs of opposites of human shape and animal, wild and tame, sits Cernunnos, both human and part animal. A second test of the theory is even more idiosyncratic, the image from Mont Saint-Jean. This god is clearly identified as Cernunnos by the stumps of broken-off antlers, and yet he is standing rather than cross-legged, isn't accompanied by a ram-headed snake, and though he is wearing a torque, he isn't holding one. What he does hold, however, are a bow and a billhook. Those who wish to see Cernunnos as a god of the wild might be heartened by the bow. This interpretation is denied us, however, by the presence of the billhook, a tool not associated with hunting the wild or animals. So what do we have here? Pruning, although it cuts branches off and is therefore seemingly destructive, is performed to encourage growth. It is a constructive act. It is, of course, performed on trees, not wild trees, however, which would support the Lord of the Forest theory, but domesticated ones. The bow, on the other hand, is used against wild animals. It is a destructive tool, one which kills, but also one through which food is provided to mankind. So here again we have a series of opposites expressed in objects. In one hand is the vegetal, domestic, growth-promoting bill, and the other the animal, wild, destructive bow. We therefore have the same message as that conveyed by the usual torque and serpent combination. The artist has chosen to represent this message in his own way. The objects are different, but they are still opposing. The artist possessed the genius to represent several versions of oppositions in a minimal number of symbols. We can see then that the message can be conveyed in a number of ways, but it's still the same message, that of Cernunnos as a god of bidirectionality. Himself both god and man, his nature is expressed and manifested in other paired opposites as well. This theory can be further tested by comparing Cernunnos with another Celtic god with whom he has sometimes been conflated, one whose Celtic name is unknown, but has been given the modern name of the Tricephalus, the three-headed. This deity's iconography is consistent, and his worship is centered on the region of the Remi, which we've already seen to be in the area where Cernunnos was worshipped. The imagery is of a triple face on a shaft. There is one face that looks toward us, with one on each side of it, one looking left and one looking right. The faces we see in profile each share an eye with the central face. A fair number of these have been discovered, primarily in Reims, although this one is from Paris. Cernunnos can be tricephalic. He is shown like that at Bavay, Louis Saint-Georges, Condat, and at Tong-sur-Oreux. Even when he is tricephalic, however, he is recognizably Cernunnos. In only one of the four tricephalic Cernunnuses does he have the frontal face-sharing eyes form, and we never find an image where a tricephalus on a pillar has antlers. The tricephalus can be seen to overlap Cernunnos then, but not be identical with him in general. In particular ones, however, the two have been combined. This indicates that they shared characteristics, most likely functions, that caused their worshippers to identify them as the same god. Before following up on this, we have to consider the possibility that Tricephalus is in origin the same god as Cernunnos, who has been represented without antlers because he is meant to indicate Cernunnos at the time of year when stags had shed their antlers. The probability that this is correct is increased by two of the tricephalic Cernunnuses, those from Condat and Tong-sur-Oreux, having separate antlers. I've already explained this in terms of practicality and pointed out that in the case of a Tong-sur-Oreux, the antlers weren't removable. There are three facts that indicate we are dealing with two gods that were at least originally separate. First, there is the standardization of the iconography of the tricephalus. This is a deity that has a clear identity. Second, the tricephalic Cernunnos images don't have any part of this iconography except for the three heads. What we have here is one god, Cernunnos, who is seen as having something in connection with another, the tricephalus, without necessarily being the same god. Or if they are, it is Cernunnos that is the primary god, and a worshipper or worshippers of his have attached the three-headed characteristic of the tricephalus to their own god. Third, the tricephalus was worshipped in a much smaller range than Cernunnos. On this map, the Cernunnos tricephaloi are marked with black threes, and the non-Cernunnos tricephaloi are marked with blue threes. My inventory of tricephaloi is not complete, but what I do have shows a clear restriction of the plain tricephaloi. We must also keep in mind that based on the large number of images found there, Reims was the clear center of the tricephalus worship. I have accordingly used a larger font for its three. The indication is of a local deity absorbed into a more widely spread one. We still have to ask ourselves why the two deities would have been compatible enough for this absorption to have been reasonable. This raises the question of what the function of the tricephalus was. Beyond the three-headed or faced characteristic, and the limited extent of his worship, we have one more piece of evidence, which at this point should come as no surprise. He is sometimes associated with Mercury. Here we see the two deities together along with the typically unidentifiable Celtic goddess. One tricephalus from Reims is accompanied by a goat and a turtle, animals associated with Mercury. And here we see all our deities brought together. A tricephalus accompanied by Mercury's rooster and Cernunnos' ram-headed snake. There are also versions where the pillar is topped with a ram's head and a bird which is most likely a rooster. Here we probably have the tricephalus acquiring the characteristics of these deities rather than the other way round as we saw earlier. The association with Mercury indicates that, like Cernunnos, we are dealing with a merchant's god. But why three-faced? And why, beyond the merchant function, was he connected with Cernunnos? I think the connection comes through what we've seen as the defining characteristic of Cernunnos, his in-betweenness. He can be seen as looking both ways. And that is exactly what we have with the tricephalus. In the standard way of representing the tricephalus, we don't have three heads. There is a full face looking forward and two half faces looking to the sides. I suggest that this expresses his nature. He is a god who is single, but looks either and both ways. He, like Cernunnos, is a god of bidirectionality. That the Gauls saw this as a reason for the connection is shown by the image from the Tong Ceisiwr, which shows one large primary head with two smaller ones looking to the sides. The large head is who he is, and the two smaller ones are attributes. The same may be indicated at Kanda by only the central head having a neck. The other two heads are subordinate to it. My interpretation of Cernunnos as a god of bidirectionality is supported then by his connection with the tricephalus. Now let's look at the Cernunnos map again, this time with the non-Cernunnos tricephaloi added. I've marked them with blue number 3s. The tricephalus images show up right in the middle of Cernunnos' range. If Cernunnos originated in northeastern Italy, how did he get to western Gaul? I am making the bold assertion that it was via the Gundestrup cauldron, either directly or through intermediaries themselves based on the cauldron. We've already seen how the cauldron's iconographical system survived at least until the Augustan age, when it shows up on the cup from Lyon. It is therefore reasonable that other representations were influenced, again either directly or indirectly, by the Gundestrup artistic and theological traditions, or by native Western images that themselves had their origin in the Gundestrup schema. The deity as found in the cauldron would have been seen by merchants from the Paris-Rheims area, who then brought his worship back to their home area, where he was partially conflated with their tricephalic god. His worship would have appeared in a lesser degree in other parts of Gaul, also spread there by merchants. It is possible, perhaps even likely, that Cernunnos had his origin in a deity specifically connected with hunting, in particular of deer, or perhaps as a manifestation of a deer spirit, a northern Italian deer kachina, if you will. However, as early as the Gundestrup cauldron, and obviously earlier enough for an elaborate artistic and theological system to develop, he'd become much more than that. He had developed into a god of bidirectionality, ready to be discovered by merchants, and to be brought by them to western Gaul, there to be spread by them and identified with the Roman Mercury and Hercules, and with the Gaulish tricephalus. By looking at Cernunnos in a different way, willing to discard our preconceptions, we have uncovered his identity as a god who himself looks in a different way, in both ways in fact. Cernunnos becomes part of a sophisticated system of art and belief. He is rescued from the misinterpretation which had been applied to him based almost solely on his antlers, and shown to be so much more. It is not only Cernunnos who has been rescued, however. The fact that we can see his representations as very carefully thought out shows the Gauls to have been far more sophisticated than they are sometimes given credit for. They are shown in this case to have been an urbane people to whom trade was a central concern, for whom a lord of animals squatting in the forest among wild beasts was not as necessary as a god who looks both ways. In fact, even if my theory of bidirectionality is rejected, it cannot be denied that he is connected with commerce. The supposed evidence for an identity as lord of the animals turns out to be non-existent. He is strongly associated and sometimes conflated with Mercury, and the Notre Dame pillar was put up by sailors. These are things that cannot be denied, and they give us a wholly different view of Cernunnos than the traditional one. In the end, we find a god of the in-between who became a god of go-betweens.